there's a structure to this. There's a welcome. There's art or music, which brings us together. There's some thoughts of possibilities, so I talk a little bit. You talk a little bit when you convene and you lead. And then you break people into small groups and tell them, find somebody that you know the least. Don't wait to be chosen. And stop being so helpful to each other. We don't need fixing. The package isn't what I had in mind, but trying to fix it isn't going to help. And then you give people a question. In this case, why was it important for you to be here? See, that question treats citizens as choiceful. Most of the cultures treat citizens as products of their environment. How do you explain that person? Well, look where they grew up. Look at their mother, their father. Look at the neighborhood. Doesn't explain nothing. Well, they went to school, they didn't go to school. It explains nothing. I can't be explained by my story. And at some point, I need for you to hear my story, but then I need to get off it, because it's just a story. I have a whole narrative about this or that. Wandering Jew, outsider, father died young, blah, all true, useless. I made it up. The facts were there. The facts, but the meaning I gave to it was my construction. And so as an individual, if I want to welcome you home, I welcome you into an alternative narrative about who you are. And that alternative narrative is always about your commitments. I'm not interested in your history and your background. Now I am if we're drinking. But other than that, I'm not interested in your history. I'm interested in what you've chosen. What are you committed to? That's what the question of why did you choose to be here tonight treats you as a choiceful. What are you committed to? What's the possibility you're living into? What matters to you? Those are things every human being chooses for themselves. And to say it came from my background, a cycle of poverty, we have all this elaborate explanation that lets me off the hook. And so there's such a thing as free will. Buildings like this were built on the idea that we have a choice. They were a reflection of God, all right? So all these questions have that meaning. And so you say, let me bring these questions into the world. And the final one, well, the second one was, what's the crossroads you're at? Again, you're choosing your life. Now, Disney thinks all life ends happily. We know better. Half of us are going to die before our life is over. And so you take the notion that I have a choice, I'm choosing my life. This is where you bring accountability into the narrative. And then the third one is, what are the gifts? What gifts have I given you? And it's hard to carry your gifts. It's much easier to revert into your deficiencies. The world will fund you with your deficiencies. Nobody's going to give you services for your gifts. And so that's what neighbors and friends do. They say, well, here's the gift I got from you in the last 20 minutes. And when somebody gives you that information, you say, that's important. I got to remember that. Thank you. I like hearing that. Period. Eye contact. Tell me more. So that's a package. It's a structure. It builds community every time. Now, you also got work to do. So sometimes you say, what are we going to do together? Let's build something, start something, convene something, stop something. That's all fine, but without the connection, the content won't go anywhere. It'll just be interesting. So that's the basic thought. So let me ask you one more striking question. The conversation of gifts, what struck you about that experience? And if you thought it was horrible, awful, and a bad idea, you're welcome to express that. And in that case, I will not interrupt you. Otherwise, I'm making no promises. So one way to frame this is that a neighborhood or a community is nothing more or less than its narrative, the story it tells about itself. So I live in Cincinnati. The biggest problem with Cincinnati is the story it tells about itself. So I moved to Cincinnati, and people say, what are you doing here? Did you get lost? Sleep through? You stop? They can't imagine anybody coming by choice. You're either born here or hired into it. And so to me, the work when you gather is both to do things together. You hear from your comments that this is a quick way to get connected, to feel less isolated. The killing part of patriarchy is its isolating effect. The killing part of like-mindedness produces loneliness in a strange way. And so this is really about shifting the narrative. And there's certain conversations that have the power to change the world. And certain conversations don't change the world. Talking about problems doesn't change the world. Cincinnati, in the last 15 years, has done 13 studies on racism. Guess what they found? Racism is a problem. Whoopee. So that tells me that analyzing the problem doesn't solve it. It may even sustain it. Because so analyzing things, talking about problems, the alternative is to say, what's the possibility we came here to create? So the possibility conversation is a declaration. I am the possibility of a reconciled community. It's not a goal. It's a possibility. So that whenever you walk into the room, that possibility walks in with you. So what you heard is people's generosity. Said, I was touched by what they said to me. I felt less alone. I found some peace. So you are a possibility, and as soon as you name it, you brought it into the world. Imperfectly. Blame takes me nowhere. You can protest, you can be an advocate, help find your voice. Amen. Good. Doesn't change much, because it's still waiting for somebody else to respond. And these days, I can't figure out who's in charge. Especially if you look at the people running for office. I don't know what they're in charge of, except maybe focus groups and media money. And so you say, complaining, blaming, statements of ownership changes the world. So I have created the world, even the one I'm complaining about. And so you're always asking people, what is your contribution to having created the world, even the one you're unhappy with? And it's an ownership concept. There has to be a place for dissent. If I can't say no, my yes means nothing. And if people have to have the freedom to say no and don't do anything about it. People give you a hard time and say no and dissent and refuse, just say that's interesting. And you all are in leadership roles. They say, well, we don't like this. And you say, thank you for telling me. And they say to you, what are you going to do about it? And your answer is, nothing comes to mind at the moment. What the hell kind of leader are you? It's not what I'm looking for. I know I'm not the leader you're looking for. I'm not your mother. I'm not your father. You want to create a world? Get busy. I'll join you. But this notion that I can promise you a safe future is foolishness. Anybody who promises you a job, promises to raise your child, promises to keep you safe or healthy is lying to you, and they're selling you something. And so this whole dissent, very powerful. What's the no you've been postponing? Great question. What's the yes you no longer mean? Great question. What's the forgiveness you're unwilling to offer? Amazing question. There's another conversation of commitment. What's the promise you're willing to make? Instead of barter. If you'll do this for me, I'll do that for you. That's not commitment. That's let's make a deal. And in a consumer culture, I've taken the commercialization of goods and internalized it to my relationship. So what's in it for me? Next somebody says to you, what's in it for me? Say, nothing comes to mind at the moment. I am not on this earth to satisfy your petty little desires. I'm not your mother, I'm not your father. Grow up. Well, that's not very kind. I know it's not very kind. I'm just trying to be realistic here. So what's in it for me? Nothing. Now, you want to do it or not, that's a commitment. Commitment is a promise with no expectation of return. So every time you gather, you say, what's the promise you're willing to make? And if somebody says no promise, you say, thank you. What kills the future is lip service. What kills volunteerism is lip service. And communities filled with it. Oh yeah, I'll do the best I can. Just say no. And so in a community world, when people say no, they don't lose their seat at the table. In the system world, it's called disloyalty. We want can-do kind of people here. We want bottom line oriented. So commitment, big question, big conversation. What's the promise? And the last one is gifts. That every time we're together, I need to know what gift you received from me. And I carry the burden of that. And every time we're together, I need to tell you, here's what you did that was useful to me. And leave it at that. And then that creates a whole different context for how we then solve the problems. We have to do something about safety. We've got to figure out how to raise our children, not in the schools. Schools are doing everything they want. I don't want them to develop character, socialize, sex education, keep them from doing drugs, behavioral problems. That's not business of schools. That's a family business. That's neighborhood business. And together, these kids are longing for us. And you go into any inner city and see the kids that are troublemakers. As soon as they realize you're interested in them, everything changes. They say, wow, wow. So that's all a narrative shift. And you initiate it by just questions. And so that's the idea here, is to not only shift my narrative, which I'm in the process of doing, but you say there's a communal narrative about these cities that needs to, and we can do that because every time we show up, we bring an alternative conversation of possibilities, of gifts, of dissent, ownership, commitment, and something, and all by invitation. But what you all are, the reason you're here is because somebody knows how to invite you. And so you say, what's the action step following this invite? And what do you do after you invite? You invite some more, and invite some more. And if people say no, you say thank you. Now come again. Thank you, come again. And so the world, this invitational part, changes everything. So I'm going to stop there. I'm turning it back to you, Linda. Turning it back to my supervisor. Are you going to sing again? I don't know what the hell's going on. But anyway, God bless you. Thank you very much.
Well, I hope you enjoyed the show today. And if you enjoyed hearing about community and structure and belonging and gifts, we ask that you give us a call and join us, because we're going to continue these conversations and this work in our community. So come join us and have a great week.